All right, we'll pick up in Acts chapter 18, where we were 2 weeks ago. We were talking about Paul's continued second missionary journey. He left Athens in verse 1 and went down to Corinth. We talked about Corinth a bit. Found a man named Aquila and his wife Priscilla, who are going to become leaders within the early church. This is like any other New Testament character or person that we read about. We don't have a whole lot of information that I'm confident in. Let me put it that way. We don't get a lot of information outside of the Bible that we can put our confidence in that tells us how they lived their lives and what they did and exactly where they went and what they did and all those things. But they apparently became leaders within the early church. And they were tent makers, and Paul stayed with them for a while. Then in verse 4, we talked about last time, he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, and my version says, tried to persuade both Jews and Greeks. David mentioned that his just says that he persuaded both Jews and Greeks and wondered why the difference. So, David, did you research that any? That's where it just told me my iPad was left behind. It thinks I'm not here anymore. Lowell, go ahead.
The Amplified uses the phrase won over.
Won over. So if you look at this, and we'll kind of look at this from a couple of different perspectives today, let me go ahead and show you every New Testament that I've got. Okay, and we're not going to read every one of these, but King James Version says persuaded the Jews. American Standard says persuaded the Jews. Bible in Basic English, turning Jews and Greeks to the faith. Contemporary English, he spoke to Jews and Gentiles and tried to win them over. English Revised, trying to persuade them to believe in Jesus. Good News Bible, trying to convince both Jews and Greeks. World English Bible, persuaded Jews and Greeks. So you can see it's kind of half and half. You're looking at a bunch of different translations. About half of them say trying to persuade, about half of them saying persuade. And if you look at the Greek on this, let me just go ahead and pull up. This is off of BibleHub.com. This is an interlinear translation. I don't know how many of y'all have ever messed with an interlinear translation. But it gives you the Greek, and then right below it the English. It also gives you the Strong's number, and you can do some more research off of that. I got this off of Bible Hub, is where I pulled this one. So if you want to read that in the red, it tells you the English words. It says, literally, he was reasoning now in the synagogue on every Sabbath, persuading both Jews and Greeks. So this, if you look at the English version of the concordance for this, let's go ahead and pull this up. This is the Greek word epithos, or epitho, or epithen, depending on the type of word you use. And what I really want to get out of this particular opening is all these different variations of this word. These are the Greek variations of it. There are 35 of them in this list. The word is used about 53 or 56 times, depending on which of these words they include in the list and things of that nature. But there's a whole bunch of these words that all come off of, or this word is a root for, these other words. Greek is complex, in case you hadn't figured that out yet. That's why we say it's Greek to me, It's kind of hard to figure out. But if we go back to Strong's, so let's go ahead and look here for just a minute. Get rid of that ad. This is the same word that is used in Matthew 17:4, Acts 17:4, where Paul was trying to convince people there. It's the same word, and that word there is translated trying to persuade. So if you look at all the different word studies you can look at, and look at how it's translated in other places. If you look here at the NAS, this is New American Standard Concordance. It's translated assure, confident, convinced, followed, have confidence, listen, obey, obeying, persuade, persuaded, persuading. Thayer's tells us that this is a persuasive power or persuasion, to persuade. It can also mean to make friends of or win one's favor, to convince unto or to persuade unto. So this is kind of what we're looking at here when we try to figure out exactly the difference in some of these passages between older translations, such as the King James Version, and some of the newer translations, such as the Christian Standard, New International, things like that. There are a lot of things that go into making these verses say what they say. They don't enter into it lightly, but they put a lot of effort into it, and it's more complex than even I can follow sometimes. But if we go back into that word, and I'm going to look at the simple dictionaries here. So we'll pull this up. And in the King James, if you look at how it's translated, the word they say is found 58 times. Translated, persuaded 16 of those, trust 7, confidence 6, obey 5. And so we're looking heavily at context for what this means. This is not something that you can just say, oh, blue means blue and red means red. Blue can mean I'm depressed, or it can mean blue the color, or it can mean all these other things. So we have to take that into account when we look at the Greek. And what I think I want to show you this morning is mounts. I've got 3 different dictionaries here. Typically, I like Thayer the best. In this case, I think they fell short. But mounts, the reason I like it is because it kind of shows you its usage in the New Testament. So the first one, of course, is to persuade or seek to persuade or endeavor to convince, or to persuade or influence by persuasion, to appease or render tranquil. Believe it or not, it's used to describe a tranquilizer. I'm not real sure how that comes off, but it does. To suffer oneself to be persuaded, to yield to persuasion, to be induced, to confide in, trust, rely on. This is all different usages of this word in your New Testaments. And within this word, as you can see, attempt to or to try to persuade someone is very much part of the definition of this word. So, to me, the difference between the translations is more about what do I think the context is here versus the other places that it's used. To me, and we know this, Paul did not have a 100% conversion rate, right? He didn't have a conversion rate of 100%. Jesus did not have a conversion rate of 100%. We don't have a conversion rate of 100%. So everything that Paul is doing is in an effort to persuade those who don't believe to come to a knowledge and faith in God. So whether this is translated, tried to persuade, or persuaded, is not too important, because he did persuade some, and so he persuaded them. There are others that I'm confident he did not persuade. And so we kind of use it how we feel like the context is in each particular passage. So it's really one of those things where you can still dig into it, and unless you're in the brains of the person that wrote the translation, I don't know that we're going to understand the reasoning behind it, unless we pull them into this church and say, why'd you do that? You know?
You said the reasoning behind it. The reason with is what the NIV said.
Right. You know, so it's all a matter of, it means the same thing. Paul's out there, he's trying to convince people to become Christians, to follow Christ, and to abandon their Jewish background. And that is met with mixed success everywhere you look. Between Jesus and Paul and everyone else that went out and tried to teach and preach. Mixed results. So anyway, in verse 4, he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, tried to persuade both Jews and Greeks. When Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul was occupied with preaching the message and solemnly testified to the Jews that Jesus is the Messiah. Let me get back over into my notes now. So, you're getting this whole group of guys down here that's testifying to the same thing. Jesus is the Messiah. Okay? It's something when you hear it from one person. It's a little more when you hear it from 2 or 3 people. It's a little more when you hear it from 5 or 6 people. Every person that you talk to that says this thing is true adds weight to the claim. So if I wanted to convince someone that the Arkansas Razorbacks are great and that the Texas Longhorns are bad, I wouldn't have to work very hard in here to convince you all of that fact. If I went to Texas and tried to convince Texas folks that Arkansas is better than Texas, I'm going to have a lot of trouble, right? Same way with trying to convince the Jews that Jesus is the answer. Well,
Let me read a verse in Colossians.
go ahead.
Colossians 1:28, whom we preach, warning every man and teaching every man in all wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
That's just part of the verse, the
Right.
core, but
Sure.
you know that all men didn't accept it.
Right.
Even though they taught all men.
Right.
It's a statement that they didn't exclude anyone.
Right. You go out and you teach and you preach to everyone. It doesn't matter who. Doesn't matter the color of their hair or the clothes on their back, does it? There's not a single person we shouldn't be willing to teach and to discuss Christ with. All right, so in verse 6, this is kind of where we left off 2 weeks ago. But when they resisted and blasphemed, he shook his robe and told them, your blood is on your own heads. I am innocent. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles. You ever reach this point in trying to talk to someone? Not even just about the Bible, but just about life in general, You tell them and you tell them and you tell them and you're blue in the face. And you tell them one more time and then say, I'm done with you. If you can't fix this, then I can't fix it for you. You're going to have to do it for yourself. Well,
Do you shake your clothes off at them when you walk away?
not literally. Which Paul did that here. This blasphemy is the same Greek word used in Matthew 27 where the crowd is hurling insults at Jesus while he's on the cross. Blaspheming in church use typically means blaspheming against the Holy Spirit and attributing to non-Holy Spirit entities the works of the Holy Spirit. But it can also just mean hurling insults and making fun of and picking on and bullying and all that good stuff. And that's what they were doing here to Paul. They were attacking him personally. Yeah, Glenda? Mm-hmm.
We've heard people kind of, repeat that, and I've said it myself, and it's one of those. But there's other, in my opinion, I'm asking for yours, or thing, make sure I'm looking at this right. This is a verse, and this is what Paul did there, but because of other things in the Bible and how we're supposed to love everybody, should we be that harsh? If, rubber meets the road, or should we just, we go ahead and just show you that's not our thing, but, we don't need to say we're done with it here. Or is it just depending on the situation?
So that's going to be a situational thing. I will tell you that I have told patients in my office, you either go get a second opinion or I will not work with you anymore. I have done that because they needed to go get a second opinion and they were dragging their feet and they wouldn't do it and they wouldn't listen. I'd been working with them for 3 months and we were getting nowhere. And so I finally just said, if you want me to continue to work with you, then you will go get a second opinion. Or we can call quits to your therapy right now. I had one lady one time in the hospital that had a hip replacement, fully elective procedure. She knew what she was getting into. And I went in there to get her out of bed the next day. She would not get up. No matter what I did, I spent 15 minutes in there trying to talk to her and trying to get her out of bed. So I couldn't do it. Nurse went in there, nurse couldn't get her to get up. Tried again that afternoon. Could not get her out of bed. Wouldn't do it. Went back in the next morning. I told her the afternoon before, you're going to have to get out of bed before we send you home. We cannot send you home without knowing if you can walk or not. And so you're going to have to do it for me in the morning. You can come by, but I ain't doing it. You know? And so I went in the next morning and talked to her, and I said, look, you know, if you don't get up, we're going to have to send you to a nursing home because we don't have any place to put you that we can count on you being safe. And so she said, I don't care what you do. I am not getting out of this bed. And so I called her doctor coming off the elevator. I told him what she said. He said, I'll fix that. And he came out of her room 5 minutes later and said, send her to a nursing home. I want her gone by noon. Because she would not do what she was told. And so you do that in an effort to win people over and try to get them to see we really have to take this seriously. We have to do this or we're not going to get the outcome that we desire. So while you work with people and you work and you work and you work and you come to know that person and that individual and you know what's likely to work with them, what's not likely to work with them. Some people respond well to having a deadline and having that put in front of them, we got to do this. Other people, the harder you push at them, the more they're going to kick. And so sometimes maybe you just need to back off. Now, does backing off mean you never go back? I don't think so. You know, if they change their opinion. If they have something happen and their heart softens, then we can certainly go back to them. We never fully close the door, but we're not going to make tremendous effort anymore either. There's going to have to be something changed on their end before we can continue on our end. And so I think it is a highly situational thing. Clinton?
I was curious, did she ever respond?
Oh, she went to the nursing home by noon. Yeah, I don't know what happened to her after she went to the nursing home. But she would not do it. So there you go ahead.
We can see by the previous verses you read that they was Jewish and proselytes.
Right.
Apparently, the Jews were the ones that rejected the teaching of Paul in verse 7 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Why did the Gentiles object, and why did,
The Jews.
not accept the gospel, but the Gentiles did?
So you're trying to overcome with the Jew a millennia, if not a millennia, at least several centuries worth of tradition and family teaching and family doctrine. And it's hard to change stuff like that. If I moved to Texas and you told me I had to become a Texas Longhorns fan, I would have a real hard time doing that. It would not be something I would accept easily. Or if I were to move to Alma, Arkansas, and someone told me I had to become an Alma Airedale, you know, I think that's even worse than the Texas Longhorns. But, you know, it doesn't come easily to us when we're having to change those centuries and millennia of tradition where we are convinced that we are absolutely right and that we know everything that there is to know about Old Testament teaching. And someone comes in and saying something that is, at first glance, without digging deeper, but at first glance, completely opposite to everything we've ever been taught. So we're looking for a Messiah, but Jesus isn't coming in the way that we want him to come. We want him to come in and set up this earthly kingdom and conquer the world and do all of this stuff. But instead, when Jesus gets here, he's coming in and he's trying to change hearts rather than changing the political landscape. And at this point in time, by the first century, Judaism is as much a political system as it is a religious system. And when you start to change political systems and you start trying to remove people from power, they kick back. Why do you think we have 80-year-olds serving in Congress? You know, they don't want to give up the power. Go ahead, Larry.
Well, even the proselyte is not considered a Jew. He has
Right.
the same rights as a Jew did.
Right.
In certain areas, he can go to the temple.
Mm-hmm.
Those spiritual.
Right.
So I think that it was a lot deeper than that. I think these Jews were convinced that they were God's chosen people, and that the
know that. Yeah.
And I think the Gentiles at this time was looking for something. The Jew wasn't looking for anything.
Right.
Except what they figured it ought to be.
Well, the Jews had a deeper background. The Gentiles had very little exposure. They weren't taught from their childhood all of this stuff. And so you're starting with a clean slate. You know, we have people that are from other countries moving into Fort Smith to work on the air base. They don't know an Arkansas Razorback from a Texas Longhorn. And so they're going to be pretty easy convinced that they need to be Razorback fans since they're living in Arkansas. It's easier to convince them. But, you know, to carry that just a little bit further here, we're talking about people that have open minds versus people that think they know it all. And how easy is it to convince a know-it-all that they're wrong? I've never been successful. I don't know if y'all have. But I've never been successful in convincing someone that thinks they know it all that they're wrong. Gentiles didn't think they knew it all. Jews did. Jews had this 1,000-year background of being God's chosen people. Let's not neglect that fact that they were his chosen people, and he told them that through the prophets on more than one occasion. You're my chosen people. So naturally, because they're God's chosen people, that means everyone else is down here on the bottom, you know, bottom dwellers. And so it creates a arrogance that people that aren't in that situation don't have. Lowell, you had your hand up a few minutes ago.
Well, yeah, you know, the day of Pentecost, the 3,000 were Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of the difference there in converting the Jews was they were in an area where Jesus had been known,
Mhm.
and you know, they had to have heard and talked about the things that Jesus did and others had seen. That made it a whole lot easier to convince the Jews. And Paul is fighting that situation here.
Mhm.
They didn't have any previous experience of who?
Mhm.
You know.
Yeah. You know, the news that nowadays travels instantly, traveled very slowly back then. I don't know how much they knew about Jesus and how much they had heard about the miracles he performed and about the raising from the dead. Some of that was bound to have made it to them, but they wouldn't have known any kind of detail at all. So that makes a difference. Did one of y'all have your hand up? I saw one of you raise it. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, maybe a little easier time understanding Paul what he did. If you go back to the verse before, when it says Paul was not the Spirit,
Mm-hmm.
he was dedicated.
Oh, yeah.
And if he couldn't get through, he had to do the best he could to get all he could converted. He had to move on to what he chose.
Right.
I mean, when you're motivated, that's wrong. No matter what, something's going to give.
So what we're talking about here, Dave was bringing out the point that Paul was extremely committed here and very much interested in winning as many souls as possible. We're talking about a person that's passionate with what they do. When you're talking to a person that's passionate about what they believe in, it's kind of contagious, isn't it? It's kind of contagious. And it also leads to easy frustration on the person that is passionate when others don't take it as seriously as they do. And so sometimes we have to fight that instinct within ourselves of getting frustrated when people don't see things the way we see them, when we do things differently than what they want us to do them. We just have to be patient and bite our tongues and learn that maybe we don't have all of the answers that we think we have. But, you know, Paul here he's frustrated. He's tired of them. They're fighting him at every turn. So he says, your blood is on your own heads. I am innocent. I'm going to the Gentiles where they'll listen to me. So sometimes you do have to take that step of, I'm done with it. I'm not going to do any more. But I can promise you if that Jewish leadership of that synagogue came back and said, hey, Paul, you know, now that we think about it, now that we hear about some of these other things that Jesus did, maybe we were wrong. How long do you think it would have taken him to get back there? He would have come back, wouldn't he? He would have absolutely come back. Sure.
As an application for today,
Mm-hmm.
our relationship with the Jewish community and Israelis, and how Americans, they're on their side.
Mm-hmm.
I have a hard time understanding if they don't believe that Jesus came back, how we're on their side. It sounds, and we had a conversation right the day, but
Well, you know, that's a complex question that if you ask 100 people, you're going to get 100 answers to. I will tell you that there are a lot of Christians today that still think that the Jews are the chosen people of God, that they still hold a special place, and that they are God's chosen people. Now, what we have to remember is that, like we were talking about a minute ago, by the first century, they weren't just a religious entity, they were also a political entity. And what has survived today is still a religious entity and a political entity. The land that they were fighting over in that area, you know, if they tried to lay claim to all of the land they once held, you know, while the 12 tribes were around and doing all that, they'd own half the continent, you know. They're fighting over a little bitty scrap of land that is on the sea, but anyway, they are a political entity now as much as anything. So the U.S. aligning with Israel politically, you know, I don't see that being part of a religious conversation. I think we have to separate the two out. Israel, the country, and Judaism, the religion. Okay? Israel, the country, we have some similar beliefs with them. We feel like they're getting picked on by the people that would also like to destroy us. And so there's some self-interest there in making sure that Israel stays strong. But that's a really complex question. Yeah, I don't feel like we owe Israel anything because they're occupied by predominantly Jews. It's not a religious thing. If we are going to align ourselves with Israel politically, we can align ourselves with them politically, but it not be a endorsement of their religion. I feel like I fumbled through that, but it's the only way I can really think about it and make sense of it. You know, you have anything to add, anyone? Go ahead, Lowell.
Well, you know, when this country was first brought into independence, people didn't study the Bible as much as maybe we do. And there are statements that say, you know, the Israelites belong to God, and eventually he'll take them all back in.
Right.
Sometimes we don't even understand exactly what that meant.
Mm.
And because of the first century, not first century, when America was first independent, that was really on their mind as well.
Mhm.
That was something that was important to them.
Right.
And not understanding or not being able to distinguish exactly what that meant,
Mm-hmm.
the intention was we need to protect them because that's
Right.
what God wanted. And we were more of a God-serving country when we
Mm-hmm.
were first established.
But we sometimes forget the fact that the Gentiles were brought into the fold and made equal with the Jews. You know, that's right. So, like I said, I think we have to separate out the political entity and the religious entity. And, you know, we can support Israel, the nation, without supporting Judaism. Larry, did you have a comment back there? Okay. All right, so anything else through verse 6 we can talk about or point out? Matthew 14, where Jesus told them to shake off the dust on their sandals. If someone wouldn't listen to him, you go out, leave the house, shake your sandals off at the door and leave. Acts 13, Paul shook off his feet in Antioch of Pisidia when people wouldn't listen. Nehemiah 5 also contains a similar story. So this is not something new. This is something that's done periodically, and something that we kind of have to do sometimes in our own lives.
Joe, do you know the definition of that?
Of what?
Shaking off the dust. Is it just an expression, or did they actually physically try to shake dust off into their face?
Well, it seems to be an actual action where they physically shake off their feet. When it talks about them tearing their robes, they would literally tear their robes. Clinton, go ahead.
I heard more than one commentator say, it makes sense to me that the most Jewish thing that any Jew can do is follow Christ, Jesus is the Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's the most Jewish thing they can do.
Right. It should follow through logically, shouldn't it? It really should. But yeah, in what I read, I think it's a literal action where they're, kind of like Pilate washing his hands. He literally washed his hand in the basin of water, washed his hands of Jesus.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to literally go out there and shake my clothes off, But you got to remember that, most of their surfaces weren't paved. Dust was everywhere. So you're trying not to track that dust from that house where they wouldn't listen. And, it's symbolic. But I think it was a literal action. All right, so verse 7. Paul has just said, I'm going to go to the Gentiles. So he left there and went to the house of a man named Titus Justus, a worshiper of God, whose house was next door to the synagogue. Can you imagine living next door to the synagogue? Would you want to live next door to the synagogue? I can't imagine the smell from the sacrifices and the animals waiting to be sacrificed. I can't imagine the noise from all those people coming in on the Sabbath every Sabbath day, and then on the daily times where they would come in on daily things. That's not where I'd want to live. But this guy lives there. He was a worshiper of God. It was next door to the synagogue. So Paul is not going to go far. He's just going to go next door. But what does that mean, though? It means that the focus is no longer the Jews. Focus is now on the Gentiles. So he's going to leave them behind. Some think this is the same Titus that we read about later in the New Testament. Some think it's a different one. I don't know. Some argue that he went to stay with Titus and lived there, and others say that he still lived with Priscilla and Aquila, but used Titus's house for teaching. Who knows? We're not told. But the commentators argue about that. The hospitality here still continues to amaze me. We talked about that 2 weeks ago where Priscilla and Aquila put up with Paul in their house for months, 18 months, maybe more. I wonder how many people came to visit him at 2 in the morning. Say, hey, I've been thinking about what you said. I've got a question. I don't know. But it's amazing to me that they were open and willing to let him stay for so long. This was Paul in the start of the church. This is a momentous occasion in the history of the earth. Maybe not up there with the flood, maybe not up there with Jesus dying, but it's still a momentous occasion in the history of mankind. The early church is starting. There are churches being planted where there was no church before. And not only are those churches being started, they're starting with a bang. You're getting large numbers of converts, lots of people that believe. I don't think they were aware of it at the time. I don't know, maybe they were. Maybe they were aware of just how momentous an occasion this was. Maybe Paul had an understanding of just how big a role he was playing in the early church, and maybe he had an inkling that we would still be talking about him over 2,000 years later. I don't know if he did or not. But looking back, we can see how big a moment this was. And for this Titus Justus and for Priscilla and Aquila to open their homes and to be willing to serve and to be hospitable just blows my mind. Anyway, I would hope we would be as hospitable, if situations arose like that here. Verse 8, Crispus, the leader of the synagogue, believed the Lord and his whole household. Many of the Corinthians, when they heard, believed and were baptized. This is the leader of the synagogue, Crispus. That'd be like the Pope converting today. Okay? This is a big deal. Crispus is the guy. He makes the decisions. He runs the synagogue. He does it all. And Paul was able to bring him to the knowledge of the truth. So what does that mean when someone with that much respect, that much leadership, that big a following is converted? A lot of the people that were following him are going to convert too. Okay? So Crispus used his influence, undoubtedly used his influence, and brought others to Christ as well. So if we're talking about conversions like this, and we want to think about what does that mean for the church in the area, it's great to have all the conversions we can get. Sometimes converts are more influential than others. They can bring other souls with them and bring others along to the truth. Crispus is one of those guys. We don't know a whole lot about Crispus. Let's see, 1 Corinthians 1:14 tells us that Crispus was one of the few that Paul personally baptized. He also baptized Gaius in the household of Stephanas. We really don't know much about Crispus other than what we read right here. But tradition holds that he was martyred for his faith. That he became a leader and that he was martyred because of what he was doing and what he was teaching.
The Jews just like him before. Because he left the Jewish faith.
Right. He would have been viewed as a traitor. Yeah. And so I can't imagine what his life was like for a little while. If I was Crispus, I'd probably have to move. Get away from the crowds, Get away from the ones that would try to torment me. Go ahead, Lowell.
Before we close the class, I'd like to tell something that went through my head last night.
Okay.
I was praying, and I thought, if God could forgive David for the sins that he did with Bathsheba and killing her husband, having her husband killed, he could certainly forgive my sins.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to thinking, Bathsheba had to be pregnant for a month or two before she realized it.
Mm-hmm.
That means her husband had to be off in battle for at least 2 months, and you don't know how long he was there before the battle started. And it's not mentioned in the Bible, but I got to thinking about all of the soldiers, probably 100,000 or so maybe, having to eat. And think how much groceries you bring home every week. And I got to thinking about, that's a lot of food. God had to help them with the food during this time, and I don't recall it ever being mentioned in the Bible.
No.
There are a lot of blessings that God gives that we don't even know about.
There were many miracles performed that were not labeled miracles too.
That's true.
So yeah, God blesses us in ways that we can't even possibly imagine. He works in our lives in ways that we don't understand and will probably never know. Unless we happen to ask him one day when we reach heaven. It can become mind-boggling, can't it? It can really mess with our brains. So thank you for your attention and your comments. I'll be back up here probably in a couple of weeks.